In 2020, citizens across the country watched their cities literally burn as law enforcement was told to stand down. Since then, instead of taking steps to stop the crime, blue cities across the country have made it easier for criminals to destroy their cities, while law-abiding citizens, business owners, and law enforcement are the ones handcuffed. But here's what's really going to make your stomach turn. All of it is being done on purpose. And even more nauseating is we were warned about it over 50 years ago and did nothing. Rosie the Riveter here, dropping more truth bombs to destroy fake news and propaganda. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell to get new videos when they are uploaded. Now, let's get into today's riveting topic. In 1969, the Creature from Jekyll Island author, G. Edward Griffin, laid out the communist plan for overthrowing America, and he brought receipts. I encourage you to watch his entire presentation, but today I want to focus on the communists' goal towards policing, which they hid in plain sight. First, let's review the communists' overall objectives and strategies using a new kind of war, an economic and social one.
There are many men who are physically brave beyond any question when it comes to standing up against a tyranny that threatens with armies. Some of them carry the actual scars of battle to prove it. But when it comes to this new kind of war, they're lost to the fight. When there is no battlefield, when the weapons are not rifles or bombs but economic pressures, then who is your enemy? How do you fight? Where do you begin? It's precisely for these reasons that any modern dictatorship must have control over the economic sphere of all human activity. This was true of Nazism. It was true of fascism, it's true of communism, and it's also true of socialism. Regardless of what name we give it, total government control is by definition totalitarianism. That's what the word means. Now, Leon Trotsky, as you recall, was one of the original Bolsheviks who led the communist revolution in Russia. In 1937, Trotsky wrote a book entitled The Revolution Betrayed. And in this book, here's what he said. The basis of bureaucratic rule is the poverty of society in objects of consumption. When there is enough goods in a store, the purchasers can come whenever they want to. When there is little goods, the purchasers are compelled to stand in line. When the lines are very long, it's necessary to appoint a policeman to keep order. Such is the starting point of the power of the Soviet bureaucracy. It knows who is to get something and who has to wait. And ladies and gentlemen, there's no better description than that of why the communists work to promote socialism. No matter whose definition you use, under socialism, those who run the government, and the communists are confident that in America they eventually will be the ones who do so, those who run the government will know who is to get something and who has to wait, and that represents control over human beings. What has all this to do with the communist revolution in America? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has everything to do with it, because the building of socialism is the communist revolution in America. It represents the process whereby our country can be moved gradually toward communism without the people even being aware of it. No matter what grievance we may have, real or imagined, no matter what national problems we may face, the communists seize upon these as excuses to build socialism. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. And forgive me for saying it one more time, total government is communism. Now, the People's World, the official West Coast newspaper of the Communist Party, in its August 28, 1965 issue, ran this rather interesting editorial. What is needed now is an effort that begins to approximate the magnitude of the problem. As a minimum, such a program should demand massive emergency action by the federal government. Well, then, 6 months later, after this particular article, the Communist Party came out with this. It's called The New Program of the Communist Party, but this was the first draft, published in 1966. And here's what it said. We favor full use of federal powers to achieve these objectives. Now, as I read this, listen carefully to see if it doesn't sound familiar, perhaps like something you've heard from more respectable sources. Government assumption of responsibility for assuring a guaranteed annual wage. Complete cradle-to-the-grave social insurance coverage, including all medical care. Equal educational opportunities for all, with acceptance of the principle of student stipends. A national reconstruction plan to end ghettos and slums and provide the nation with a modern rapid transit system operated as a public service. And passage of a National Youth Act that will ensure education, vocational training, and employment at decent wages for the younger generation. Does that sound familiar? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if it reminds you somewhat of the Great Society, it's because it is the Great Society, lock, stock, and barrel. The next question of importance is, how do the communists promote socialism? Certainly it takes far more than a mere declaration of intent, more than writing a few books. How can they bring it off, especially when there are so few of them? How can they manipulate the vast majority into accepting socialism when they really don't want it? Well, here again we find that they have a plan. The strategy is precise and well tested. It's called revolutionary parliamentarianism.
Griffin explained this process as a pincer movement, where bureaucrats, legislatures, and leaders at the top of society push down on the people, suggesting, constructing, and implementing socialist policies. Groups and populations at the bottom are manipulated and riled up, often through the use and reliance on those socialist programs, to demand more such policies, while the silent majority, and it is the majority, sits wondering what happened to the country. To understand revolutionary parliamentarianism, let's review the rise of the 20th century's most notorious socialist and see if anything looks familiar. Immediately after becoming chancellor on January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler started taking steps to usurp local authority from police forces and place it under his control nationally. Within 2.5 weeks, the Nazis issued a decree encouraging the police to go after their political opponents. 5 days later, the Nazis deputized members of the SS, which was Hitler's personal bodyguard unit, the SA, a Nazi paramilitary organization also known as the Brown Shirts, and Stahlhelm, a nationalist veterans organization. Over 50,000 of these paramilitary troops in Prussia alone were allowed to patrol alongside official policemen. Since their allegiance was to the Nazi regime and not the German states, they willingly attacked, beat, and interned their political opponents, and eventually the Jewish people, as those in control not only allowed the abuse, they encouraged it. Less than a week later, and exactly 4 weeks after Hitler took office, arson destroyed the Reichstag Parliament building in Berlin. Not letting a crisis go to waste, Hitler's National Socialist Party immediately blamed the communists, claiming they were planning an uprising or insurrection to overthrow the government. Miraculously, the Nazis produced an emergency decree within hours called for the protection of the people and state, or Reichstag Fire Decree, which they convinced President von Hindenburg to sign while the Reichstag was still smoldering. The decree not only suspended such civil rights as freedom of speech and the press, as well as the right to assembly, it also gave the police unchecked power. They were granted the authority to officially target political opponents, including arresting and incarcerating them without specific charges, terminate opposition organizations, and censor dissenting voices. Hitler now had his top down.
Is it possible, do you suppose, that revolutionary parliamentarianism is being used against America today? Is there any evidence of this kind of pressure from above? Well, ladies and gentlemen, all you have to do to answer that question is read some of the official reports and recommendations that have been pouring out in a steady stream for years from the bureaus, special agencies, and commissions of the federal government. Consider, for example, just those reports issued by the various President's Commissions. The President's Commission on Automation, the President's Commission on Crime, the President's Commission on Civil Rights, to name just a few. Now, this is perhaps the most classic recent example. It's the report of the President's National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, better known as the Kerner Report, released to the public in March of 1968. Have you read this? It's incredible. The list of recommendations supposedly to remove the causes of civil disorders in America reads almost identical to the new program of the Communist Party. And that's not much of an exaggeration either. It calls for the vast expansion of all welfare programs and agencies. It suggests absorbing all city, county, and state welfare programs into one gigantic federal welfare program. And why have state socialism when you can have national socialism? It calls for a government-guaranteed minimum wage. It calls for federal financing and control of every conceivable sphere of human activity: education, housing, transportation, even insurance policies. It calls for strict gun control laws and even recommends the creation of a national police force. Now, naturally, it doesn't call it that by name. It refers to it as the National Law Enforcement Center. But there's no doubt as to what its ultimate form will be, especially since it's to operate in conjunction with the Defense Department.
The Nazis had the fire decree ready to go in hours, like it was already prepared and they were just waiting for an opportune time, like a crisis, to push it through.
Libertarians were opposed to it right after 1994, and you can ask the Attorney General this because I got a call when he introduced the Patriot Act. He said, "Joe, I'm introducing the act basically as you wrote it in 1994. It was defeated then not by any liberals. It was defeated then by the folks who worried that we'd have the Minutemen would get in trouble, by the Mr. Barrs of the world, who were worried about the right wing, not anything else." So just that has nothing to do with you all, but just to set the record straight. Almost the same thing that got passed, the Patriot Act, was introduced by me in 1994, and it was the right wing that defeated it. You guys tried to help get it passed, including the wiretap changes and the rest. So
good, because we have a vote.
History does not repeat, but I think we can agree there's a lot of rhyming going on here. In addition to grabbing massive authoritarian control, the Nazis soon implement massive gun control measures, including confiscating weapons. Using fear-mongering propaganda, the Nazis convinced the German people these actions were necessary to protect them from Bolshevism or communism. In reality, the Nazis were just projecting their own goal of overtaking Germany's law enforcement institutions, installing Nazi loyalists, and implementing a totalitarian police state. Socialists and communists constantly pit themselves against each other. Yet remember, socialism is just the vehicle to get you to communism. Socialism pushes a society with policies, while communism shoves society with guns. Either way, the destination is a totalitarian state. So, Nazis instilled fear with Bolshevism. Today's buzzword is terrorism. After 9/11, Congress pushed through the overreaching Patriot Act, claiming national law enforcement needed tools to combat terrorism. Obama, and now Biden, continue those calls for stronger powers to fight terrorism while simultaneously allowing terrorists to casually cross our southern border unchecked. But those aren't the terrorists the deep state is targeting and using these policies against. Revelations over the past few years have exposed the Marxist corruption within our three-letter agencies as they target domestic terrorists in America, otherwise known as Christians, pro-life, MAGA supporters. Patriots, I give you America's SS security forces. Our paramilitary brown shirts equivalent organized in 2013 during the Obama administration with the formation of Black Lives Matter. On the local level, George Soros installed DAs throughout the country who are exhausting every resource to find and prosecute law-abiding citizens who support life, election integrity, law and order, and protecting their children from gender indoctrination, while BLM and Antifa brown shirts continue to actually terrorize communities without any consequences. Anyone trying to expose our corrupt system is ironically censored, deemed a Nazi, and targeted for destruction. That's in the Nazi playbook too, ladies and gentlemen, and is what a full police state looks like. In 2020, Marxist nudges became outright shoves as the top pushed down on some blue cities, literally defunding the police by actually withdrawing money from law enforcement departments. Other city councils, mayors, city managers, and amazingly enough, some police chiefs have been more stealth, hiding their actions from the community by quietly undermining their police officers and pushing morale into the dumper. There's your top down, patriots. Bottoms up, anyone?
Now, the opportunity is to recognize that a governing movement is three things. It's top down, you handled that. You got the White House, the Senate, and the House. You handled the top down. But it's also bottom up and inside out. Top down, bottom up, and inside out. So now your challenge as you leave here, our challenge, is to take care of that bottom up part and that inside out part, the heart part.
Under the guise of equality, social justice, and all the other communist talking points Griffin described, BLM leaders and socialist professors purposely pushed down to incite college activists and BML supporters to demand policies that intentionally handcuff and punish officers for doing actual police work, while allowing criminals to not only go free, but to benefit from their actions. While I'd like to blame Nazis for the Marxist doctrine infiltrating and infecting our institutions, the truth is, they learned their philosophies from American progressives like Margaret Sanger, George Bernard Shaw, Woodrow Wilson, and Franklin Roosevelt, who were already putting such ideologies in play before and during Hitler's rise. Looking back, it's obvious the Defund the Police movement was not an organic campaign that spontaneously sprung out of the George Floyd riots. The campaign was the final step in removing the local police forces so as to implement a national law enforcement Griffin discussed.
We must support our local police. But that means a lot more than just putting a bumper sticker on the car. It means taking an active interest in civic affairs to ensure that the police aren't saddled with so-called civilian review boards. Nothing can be quite so damaging to police morale and efficiency as converting every arrest into a trial of the policeman instead of the criminal. To support your local police also means making sure they remain independent of control from Washington. And don't forget, whatever the federal government finances today, it shall control tomorrow.
Since 2020, officers have been retiring in record numbers or just walking away from the force while the number of recruits has nosedived. This is how you defund the police without defunding the police. Once the good guys are gone or mentally beaten into submission, you bring in those you can control. How? Lower hiring standards to allow criminals as well as non-citizens, which can include those who are here illegally, onto their forces. Thousands of criminals were released during COVID as illegals flooded our borders with both groups contributing to today's crime surge. While defunding the police, deep blue areas continue to pass legislation raising the legal amount one can steal, while simultaneously implementing no-bail policies along with endless handouts and benefits to illegals. Why? Top down, bottom up, ladies and gentlemen. Push down until the bottom rises up. Citizens are now demanding action. Since local police forces have been successfully depleted, where are they turning? The National Guard. Coincidence? Actually, many states have already called for National Guard help with the influx of illegals. Unfortunately, in many cases, they're only using the Guard to help the illegals, not arrest them. Well, at least for now, that is. With the people unarmed, Hitler allowed his paramilitary forces to get so brutal, so violent, and so vindictive against their opponents, the German people finally demanded something be done, which is exactly what Hitler was waiting for. They gave him permission to grab more police in control. Known as the Night of Long Knives, Hitler instructed his SA forces to purge the country of not only brown shirt leaders, who were some of his most avid supporters, but also established conservatives and anti-Nazis. Afterwards, Hitler confessed he defied their constitution to eliminate the threat, but it was for their protection, as those targeted were planning a coup against him. The people cheered him as their hero while their freedoms were massacred along with Hitler's useful idiots. Do BML, Antifa, and looters really think they are completely and forever immune from their actions? We're at a precipice, my friends. The proof is right in front of you. Do you want freedom or Marxism? Do you defend the Constitution, or do you just surrender your guns and other rights under the guise of safety? Do you fight for your children, or do you release them to the communist ideology? The choice is yours. I'm Rosie the Riveter, and that's my 2 cents. But what do you think? Do you think Griffin's warnings were legitimate? Leave your comments down below. If you enjoy my content, please consider supporting my work on Patreon. You can find my videos and my blog, Liberating Letters, at thefactspaper.com. You can also start your own research on the Facts Paper by exploring the thousands of links to articles I have, including those noted in my videos, sharing the truth fake news and propagandists won't. Investigate and discover the truth for yourself.